I spent most of my life putting others first, especially my son. My name is Helen, and I'm 62 years old. For over 30 years, I dedicated myself to raising my son, David, and supporting my husband, George. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of who I was. I gave up my dreams, my time, and even my pride, thinking it was all for the family. I remember when I was younger, before marriage and children, I wanted to be a nurse. I had applied to several nursing programs, saved money, and took evening classes. But as soon as David was born, everything else faded away. I quit school to be home with him, thinking that's what a good mother did. I worked part-time cleaning offices to help with the bills, often juggling those shifts with late-night feedings and endless tantrums. I gave up my friendships, too. There was no time for coffee dates or nights out. I normalized this as love. Sacrifice was just part of being a mother and wife. 3 sacrifices stand out clearly in my memory. First, quitting my career plans. I once thought I could be more than just a mom. Second, I worked multiple low-paying jobs so David and George could have what they needed, often taking shifts on weekends or holidays. Third, I let go of my social life, friendships, even family relationships that didn't revolve around our little circle. I told myself that my suffering was noble, a badge of honor for a woman who loved her family. But while I gave so much, I forgot to care for myself. I neglected my emotional needs, companionship, respect, even basic appreciation. Over time, a constant feeling of loneliness crept in, but I dismissed it as normal. I convinced myself it was the price one pays for being dependable. Financially, things were never easy. George's job was steady but not generous, and my work didn't cover much more than groceries and bills. Our house in a fading neighborhood of our town was old, and we barely kept up with repairs. Often, I was the one patching leaks or fixing creaky doors on my own. Dependence had become a reality. I felt tethered to George's paycheck, hoping it would cover us all. Others always saw me as the dependable woman, the rock of the family, the quiet caregiver. They praised my selflessness in small, almost dismissive ways. Helen is so good, always putting everyone first. But inside, I battled feelings of invisibility, as though my life, my desires, didn't matter. I saw myself as a shadow, always present but never truly noticed. There were moments from the past that still echo in my heart. One flashback is from David's high school graduation. As I watched him smile with his friends, surrounded by his proud wife and family, I remembered standing at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, my hand clutching a worn tissue to wipe away tears. Another memory, sharper still, is the day George told me he was accepting a transfer to another city. I had dreams of joining him, starting fresh. But when David said he couldn't leave his job or friends, I chose to stay behind in this creaky house, alone, so David could thrive. That choice felt like a sentence with no parole. At home, walls seemed to close in. The faded wallpaper peeled at the corners. The ticking clock on the mantel was the only sound piercing the silence. The living room was cluttered with photos of others, David and his wife, George and their grandchildren, but never of me. It was as if the house itself whispered what I'd come to feel. Insignificant, unnoticed. This space mirrored my soul. The worn sofa sagged where no one sat for long, and the dark curtains muffled light, much like my own muted voice in family conversations. Every creak in the floorboards reminded me of the years I had silently borne burdens, while the house grew older and more tired, just like me. The truth is, I often felt like I was living in everyone else's story, a chapter that barely included me. This endless cycle of sacrifice became my identity, and I no longer questioned it. But deep down I wondered, was this all my life would be? A slow fading into the background, unseen and unvalued. As I stand here surrounded by memories and silence, I realize that the weight I carry is not just about years gone by. It's about the pieces of myself I left behind, and I don't yet know if I have the strength to find them again. But something inside me has started to tremble, like a tiny spark in the dark. Maybe, just maybe, there is hope for something more. The event took place on a busy office floor, a place usually filled with the low hum of computers and the occasional whisper of co-workers exchanging ideas. That day, however, the atmosphere was charged with something else entirely. an unsettling tension that prickled the air and drew curious glances from every corner. As the elevator doors slid open, the sharp, shrilling voice of Mrs. Miller pierced through the usual ambient noise, instantly commanding the attention of everyone present. "This neighborhood's more like a prison," she spat, her words echoing off the white walls with a harshness that felt like a whip. "Every house with doors shut tight. Who's supposed to visit neighbors if no one leaves their homes? Curtis, you better tell them to stop shutting everyone out. And that gate? What is that? A fortress? Guarding some precious loot?" The vehemence in her tone was palpable, dragging a chill that contrasted starkly with the bright afternoon sunshine filtering through the large windows. I felt my blood run cold, remembering the fragile balance of our lives and how swiftly it was disintegrating. These were no neighbors voicing gentle complaints. These were invaders speaking with entitlement, as if the entire community belonged to them alone. Curtis, usually composed and polite, stood hunched by their side, head bowed as if trying to shrink into the floor, shrinking from the scorn being poured on us. His parents, in sharp contrast, were brazen and loud, throwing accusations and demands like weapons. Mrs. Miller's shrill voice maintained its piercing, domineering tone, outlining grievances about money owed for a broken relationship. The main accusation was crisp and cutting. My daughter allegedly owed Curtis a significant amount of money, and they were here to collect it. The room froze as Mrs. Miller steadily raised her voice, attempting to turn co-workers into witnesses against us and paint a picture of betrayal and financial irresponsibility. Her words were laced with mocking disdain and a cruel delight in making us the public spectacle. I could hear the gasps and murmurs of disbelief ripple through the gathered employees. People who had only ever seen my daughter as a diligent, hard-working woman, now confronted with this ugly public attack on her character and independence. My daughter's face flushed deep red. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, the first signs of shaking I had seen in years. The poised professionalism she had always maintained was slipping beneath the weight of humiliation. She had always been respected at work, and now, in a heartbeat, she was reduced to a target of scorn and whispers, battling for dignity amidst jeering onlookers. Instinctively, I stepped forward, gently placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. My voice was calm but firm, the steel beneath the softness evident. "I've got this." There was no room for anger or confrontation, only measured resolve. I squared my shoulders, crossed my arms, and fixed my gaze on Mrs. Miller. The defiance in my stance was a silent challenge. The arrogance in the room flickered for a moment, recognizing a force stronger than the indignation they had expected. But Mrs. Miller was undeterred. If anything, her chest puffed wider, voice rising even louder as she demanded, "We just want what's fair. Your daughter owes my son money, and we're here to collect." I arched an eyebrow, voice cutting. "Public scene or not, let's be clear about one thing. Exactly how much does she owe?" Mrs. Miller faltered, hesitation flickering for a heartbeat, before she squared her shoulders and practically shouted, "A lot." Her words hung in the air as the room collectively held its breath. "And how much is a lot exactly?" I pressed, unwavering. "A lot of money," she repeated, defiance rallying behind her. The room erupted, laughter bursting unexpectedly loud and cruel. The exact figure she named lit the spark for ridicule. Less than $3,000. The tension caved for a moment, replaced by mockery and incredulous whispers. "Did she just say 3,600? She owed hundreds of thousands, no? Where's the money gone?" The ridiculousness of the accusation was clear to everyone but the accusers. Mrs. Miller's composure wavered, but Mr. Miller quickly stepped up, clutching a giant poster board and holding it high like a banner of war. On it were itemized expenses, every coffee, dinner, movie ticket, a long list painstakingly compiled as if it were a formal budget report. His booming voice narrated the list, each expense recited with the gravitas of a financial analyst presenting a crucial quarterly report. The crowd's reaction was a mix of disbelief and amusement. The painstaking calculation of every minor expense painted a disturbing picture of obsession, not reasonable repayment demands, but a calculated attempt to humiliate. The room collectively shuddered at the peculiar pettiness of the act, and the whispers turned sharp and mocking. Is this psycho behavior or budgeting? Who keeps track of every coffee like this? Curtis muttered under his breath, barely audible. She owes me. But the damage was done. The ridiculousness of obsessively itemizing these transactions had stripped them of any moral high ground. The energy had shifted, and the dam of public opinion began to break, with people questioning the legitimacy of their claims. Throughout the ordeal, I noticed the physical signs of humiliation taking hold of my daughter. Her knees weak, palms sweaty, yet something deeper simmered beneath her surface. The realization of being so publicly dismantled was painful, but alongside it emerged a quiet, growing strength. Despite the mocking crowd and the relentless accusations, no one stepped forward to defend the assault on her character. The isolation was total, the echoes of laughter and whispers filling every inch of the spacious office. Yet amid the cacophony of disdain and scorn, I felt a flicker of something profound take root, a first breath of rebellion, a refusal to accept this humiliation silently. I kept my voice steady and composed, refusing to be baited into shouting matches or desperate explanations. Inside me, my heart pounded fast, trembling slightly with a cocktail of nausea and adrenaline. My hands, usually steady and confident, tightened into gentle fists at my sides. Thoughts raced. How had it come to this? Was this the thanks for years of sacrifice? For every sleepless night? Every penny spent? The bitter truth burned through every fiber. Love and sacrifice had morphed into an attack, care twisted into accusation. Two co-workers exchanged uncertain glances, whispering quietly about the spectacle unfolding before them. A few passed hurriedly by, eyes avoiding contact. Only one among the throng dared approach with a soft voice, barely audible. "Are you okay?" The question was a small island of empathy in the sea of hostility. I offered a faint nod, cheeks burning with a mix of shame and anger. Mrs. Miller, undeterred by any gestures or the shift in mood, delivered the final blow. "You think this is over? This is only the beginning." I swallowed hard, forcing a breath to steady myself. The celebration of victory around us, the chatter of co-workers resuming their daily tasks, the clinking of coffee mugs, the hum of the HVAC system felt surreal, juxtaposed with the crushing loneliness and injustice I bore. This was my public breaking point, the moment intimate pain spilled onto a stage where smiles and laughter thrived. The world carried on around us, oblivious to the quiet implosion beneath its surface. Yet within me, the cold clarity of humiliation was settling, sharp and unforgiving. As the event wound down, the echoes of laughter faded, but the weight of the moment pressed heavily, a silence ringing louder than any words. The cold fluorescent lights overhead flickered in rhythm, with a heart pounding in quiet defiance. I looked at my trembling hands, the physical reminder of humiliation's grasp, and I knew this was the night everything changed. A night of reckoning beneath the bright, indifferent office lights, alone amid a festival of indifference and scorn. This was the valley before the climb, the deepest echo of invisibility and pain, and somewhere deep inside, the first beat of a rising, determined spirit. Part 3. Moment of recognition. I sat on the edge of the threadbare couch, the fabric worn thin in places where I always seemed to settle. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock, a steady, relentless reminder of time passing and opportunities lost. After the night's humiliation, fatigue settled deep into my bones, but beneath it, a strange clarity began to cut through the haze. I realized with a shock that numbed my breath that this wasn't just about one bad evening. This pattern had been woven through every fragment of my life. I had been invisible in plain sight, the perennial caretaker absorbed in family shadows, bending and breaking for others' happiness, while my own needs shriveled in silence. That moment felt almost like a revelation burning through my skin. My hands, resting on my knees, trembled slightly, not with fear this time, but with the weight of realization. I understood now the full extent of how much I had given away. Years of my dreams, my voice, my worth, without ever asking for anything back. And though my family saw me as the indispensable anchor, I saw a ghost in the mirror, someone who had disappeared beneath decades of quiet sacrifices. In the stillness, I faced myself in the dim reflection of the glass door. The woman staring back was tired, yes, but there was a flicker of something new, a flicker of defiance, of hope at the brink of becoming resolve, pain mixed with pride, and a ruthless kind of honesty. I was always the fixer, the helper, the invisible. I whispered it to the empty room, an affirmation and a lament all at once. The memories surfaced, flickering like old film reels. One from years ago, a birthday dinner where I had stayed silent as my husband talked down to me in front of cousins, his words sharp and dismissive, while everyone else smiled politely, pretending not to hear. Back then, I had forced a smile, shrinking into the chair as if dissolving would make it easier. I saw now how that night was not an isolated moment, but a preview of the long decades to come. Another flashback. My son's graduation day, a moment that should have burst with pride, but I was stuck in the background, unnoticed, my presence as unseen as a shadow. He hugged his friends with sparkling eyes, while I stood there, holding a bouquet, the silence between us heavy and unexplained. I thought I was showing love by sacrificing myself, but now realized that silence was part of what kept me chained. As these memories collided with the present, a wave of raw emotion surged through me. Anger, yes, but also a fierce tenderness for that younger self who had endured so much alone. Somewhere inside, a voice, soft, insistent, began to speak over my self-doubt. You deserve more. You are more. It was simple but radical, a seed planted in barren soil. The decision came suddenly, without fanfare but with undeniable force. I chose here, in the quiet of my lonely living room, to stop being invisible. The first step did not have to be grand. It only had to be mine. I reached for the small, worn notebook hidden on the shelf. It was filled with scribbled hopes from years ago, now yellowed and forgotten. This time, I would use it. Gathering the courage felt like drawing breath after a long underwater swim. The room felt smaller and heavier, but also charged with potential. The notebook was a symbol, not of what I lost, but of what I could still reclaim. I scribbled a single word at the top of a fresh page. Enough. My walk home after the humiliating night had been cold and restless, but now, sitting there, I felt the stirrings of something new. I was seeing my life with a clarity that hurt, but also liberated. The chain of sacrifice had been long and burdensome, but it could be broken. Starting with this quiet moment of recognition, I understood the truth about my relationships. They hadn't been love, not in the way I needed. They'd been transactions weighted with obligation and silence. That truth was painful but freeing, and with it came a strange sense of power. I could no longer allow myself to be the invisible caretaker, the silent ghost. The road ahead was uncertain, but at last, it was mine to walk. That night, a shift began, not in the world's eyes, but in my own. I felt the first steady flicker of light inside a darkness that had lasted far too long. The journey was just beginning, but for the first time in decades, I believed I might find my way out. I didn't rush into anything the next morning. Instead, I sat by the window, the city's muted hum a backdrop to the storm inside me. The night's revelations had changed everything, but I wasn't ready to shout about it or lash out wildly. There was a strange peace settling into my bones, a quiet determination replacing the ache and confusion that had weighed me down for decades. I traced the outline of the small silver locket on my neck, the one my own mother had pressed into my hand long ago, a faint whisper of love in a life filled with sacrifice. That locket had been a symbol of loyalty, but I was ready to redefine its meaning. It would now stand for strength and rebirth. The first step was to plan without anyone noticing. I dug out an old notepad and began writing. Lists, goals, timelines. I needed to separate my emotions from this. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about taking back control and reclaiming my self-worth. The old me, the woman who erased herself for others, had to become a thing of the past. Days were spent researching quietly, learning about real estate laws, tenant rights, investment strategies. I watched hours of videos online and read dense articles that once would have overwhelmed me immediately. But this time, something inside clicked, and the knowledge started falling into place. The world of contracts and legal documents, once alien, became a toolkit I could wield. During one late afternoon, I found the listing for the apartment complex where Amanda, Chad, and their family lived. It was an overlooked, almost forgotten place in East Austin, Dilapidated but structurally sound and bleeding money. The owner was in financial trouble, behind on property taxes, and an auction was scheduled. My pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. It felt like fate, handing me a subtle invitation. I contacted a trustworthy lawyer through a referral, someone who understood that the quiet woman calling wasn't one to be trifled with. With every meeting, I grew more grounded, more exact in what I wanted. The lawyer spoke softly but firmly, explaining options, cautions, and opportunities. Together, we crafted a plan. I established a limited liability company, something to hold my investment discreetly at first. My name wouldn't appear on any documents accessible to the public. I didn't want strife to ripple through my small network before I was ready. The secretive aspect gave me a strange thrill. I was stepping into a new role, one of power and agency. The nights leading to the auction were restless, but electric. Each morning I awoke with a steady resolve. I wasn't sure if Amanda and Chad would ever know the real reason the rent bites they once sneered about skyrocketed, but that didn't matter. This was about my self-respect. When the auction day came, I was calm. No dramatic gestures, no confrontation, just quiet presence. With my lawyer speaking on my behalf, the bid was placed. Moments later, the building was mine. I remember the silence in the room, the finality of the gavel's fall, and the wave of emotion that threatened to surface. This was my first victory, not shouted from rooftops, but felt deeply within. I owned the place they had thought belonged to them, the same place where I'd been cast aside. The foundation beneath their feet was now mine. Over the next weeks, I took measured steps to manage the property. I updated maintenance schedules, ensuring the building was safe and livable. I wasn't interested in making their lives miserable, but I wasn't going to be their doormat either. Rent increases and lease renewals needed to reflect market reality. The notices I sent out were clear, professional, no room for excuses or manipulations. Mrs. Miller, Chad's mother, stormed into my office one afternoon, fiery eyes blazing with anger and disbelief. "Who do you think you are, Margaret?" she spat. "We've known you for years. How dare you put us through this?" Her voice trembled not just with fury, but fear. I met her gaze steadily, feeling the power of calm determination radiate. "I'm the woman you never saw before," I said quietly, "and this time, I'm standing up for myself." Curtis, Amanda's brother, tried to sneer but faltered. It was obvious they hadn't expected me to fight back or claim space. There was no yelling from me, no threats, just a presence so solid they could no longer ignore. The locket around my neck felt warm against my skin during those confrontations, a small talisman of the woman I was becoming, steady and unbreakable. Those moments of conflict, while charged, also brought a surprising joy. I had broken free from decades of invisibility. I was claiming territory in more ways than one. The more I managed the property, the more momentum I gained. Each financial decision was deliberate, each interaction measured. I refused to let old patterns of submission creep back in. At one point, doubt flickered briefly. A small voice whispered, "Are you sure this is the right path?" But I silenced it quickly. This was not just an investment. This was my stake in the world. Alongside the legal and financial tasks, I quietly began repairing parts of the building, repainting hallways, fixing broken locks, improving lighting. Tenants started to notice the difference, and trust, slowly, began to build. It was a metamorphosis, an evolution both practical and profound. Finally, even though the scars of betrayal and sacrifice remained, I stood taller. The silent victories had reshaped me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to thrive, and though the path ahead was uncertain, I was no longer terrified of what lay ahead. I was ready to forge my own destiny, on my terms. The phone kept ringing, relentless like the waves crashing against the rocky shore outside my window. I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of my first real act of defiance still pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Each ring sliced through the tentative calm I craved. The screen lit up with familiar names, some from the past, some still clinging to the present, all clamoring for me to retract, to return to the quiet obedience they expected. I let it ring out again. It started with my daughter, Emily. The call came at lunchtime, the tone urgent but laced with accusation. "Mom, how could you do this? After everything we've been through." Her voice cracked, the guilt she aimed at me thick and stifling. "Do you know what this is doing to Dad? To all of us?" She paused, as if waiting for me to justify myself, but I remained silent, gripping the phone tighter until my knuckles turned white. The line went dead on her end after a long, heavy sigh. Next came my ex-husband, Robert. His voice was colder, more calculated. "You're being selfish, Linda. You think the years I sacrificed count for nothing? You owe me. You owe this family." He listed grievances as if checking off a ledger. How I abandoned my duties. How I disrespected him by asserting myself. How I was tearing apart what we built. I wanted to argue, to tell him that what we built, well, was a prison, disguised as a home. But I only whispered, "I'm not the same woman anymore," before he hung up in a fury. Days blended into nights as the messages piled up. Texts, voicemails, more calls. Each one a weapon crafting a narrative that painted me as the villain in a play I had for so long accepted the script of. Accusations flew. Selfishness, ingratitude, madness. Some blamed me for tearing the family apart. Others screamed betrayal. I read them all but said nothing, the silence being the shield I needed most. But it wasn't just the family. Friends who once smiled warmly now asked cautious questions, their eyes filled with skepticism and pity, as if wondering what had snapped inside me to cause this transformation. The neighborhood, once my sanctuary, grew quieter and colder. The messages turned to visits, unexpected appearances at the house by relatives wanting to talk, by old friends hoping to bring me back, and by strangers with sympathetic eyes yet sharp tongues disguised as concern. At one point, my sister-in-law, Rachel, came over unannounced. Her voice was smooth, laced with false sweetness. "Linda, darling, this isn't you. Think of the good times, the sacrifices you made. You don't want to throw that all away over a whim." She tried to persuade me gently to come back, to be the selfless woman her family had always known. I watched her, noting the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth that betrayed judgment beneath the veneer of compassion. In those moments, the pressure to fold, to return to the safety of invisibility, was almost suffocating. Yet beneath the swirling storm of guilt and loneliness, a fragile flame flickered. My fists clenched, and I reminded myself of the first time I realized I had lived for others while neglecting the woman I used to be, the woman who valued herself not for what she gave, but for who she was. But the path wasn't smooth. Some nights I found myself doubting, wondering if this break was worth the isolation. I questioned if I was delusional, an ingrate who forgot the sacrifices that had kept her afloat. My body ached with the loneliness, and the echo of isolation rang louder than any voice of support. Tears came unbidden as I wrestled with the enormity of the journey I had embarked upon. Yet, with every attempt to pull me back, I drew new frontiers around my heart. I learned to say no, to close doors gently but firmly. Phone calls went unanswered, visits subtly refused. I began journaling, writing my truth for no one but myself, carving space to breathe freely without shame. This act of claiming my voice, even in solitude, was a small victory. It nourished me, giving me glimpses of the woman I was becoming. The hardest confrontation came when I reached out to my closest friend, Marta. She had been a silent witness to the years of sacrifice, the years of invisibility. When I told her of my decision, her eyes narrowed, tinted with doubt. "Are you sure this isn't just a phase? Maybe you're letting anger blind you." Her words struck me hard. For a moment, I almost gave in. But then, laying the phone down, I realized that this process wasn't about others understanding or approving. It was about me reclaiming my life, piece by piece. As weeks turned to months, I noticed a shift. The calls and messages decreased. The visits stopped altogether. I was no longer the shadow figure retreating into the background. I was a woman beginning to stand in the light, even if tremulously. The quiet that once frightened me now felt like space to breathe, to rediscover myself. The final straw came when Robert called one evening, voice shaking with desperation. "Linda, please. This isn't you. We need you back. The family needs you." I looked out the window into the night, the darkness reflecting the doubts that once plagued me. I took a deep breath and whispered back into the phone, "But I do need me, the real me, and I can't live in the dark anymore." The phone went silent. I hung up, and for the first time in decades, I felt free. One evening, driven by a restless urge to make sense of the heavy silence that had taken over my life, I found myself rummaging through a dusty box tucked away in the corner of my motel room. It was a faded, leather-bound diary, my mother's diary, a relic I'd handled countless times but never dared to open, as if the weight of its contents could break me further. But that night, with the storm outside as my soundtrack, I cracked it open, page by delicate page, and the past began to unravel in my trembling hands. Her handwriting was neat, looping, the same ink she'd used to write me notes when I was a child, the notes that carried love and hope. At first, I found the ordinary, mundane entries about the weather, our small-town church, and complaints about rising grocery prices. But then July came, and with it, a secret she had buried deep in her confessions. He was there, often, in the shadows of her words. HJS, she wrote repeatedly without naming him fully, recording meetings at hotels, small cash exchanges, words I had no right to know, but which shattered me nonetheless. This man, a part of my bloodline, a part of my fading history, had kept me a secret out of cowardice, never claiming what was his by birthright. The truth settled in my chest, like a stone. For years I had been cast aside by those I thought were family, treated as less than a daughter, less than a person deserving of respect or love. But now, armed with this revelation, I felt something stir, a raw mixture of sorrow and relief, bitterness and hope. I was no longer just the discarded. I was someone with a lineage, with a story that stretched farther than the empty promises I had suffered under. The next day began with a call, not from family but from Leonard Goldstein, a retired estate lawyer with eyes that knew too much, carrying letters and legal documents that confirmed what I'd uncovered. The estate, the promises my mother never could claim, all now bound to my name. One letter, fragile and yellowed, held the silent confession and an irrevocable claim upon a modest inheritance, bank accounts, investments, ownership papers, all valuing just over $1 million, a sum that suddenly made my precarious existence in the motel feel absurd. Holding those papers, I felt a rupture between past and present. The lingering bitterness of abandonment began to dissolve beneath the weight of recognition, the sudden lightness that came from no longer carrying this secret alone. I wasn't crazy for feeling what I did, nor was I mad for waiting for acknowledgement that never came from those who should have given it freely. That evening, quiet and alone, I sat by the window of my temporary refuge, turning the fragile pages again. A flood of memories rose, my mother's sacrifices, the love hidden inside her silence, the choices made in shadows for my sake. But most importantly, I felt the first pulse of strength, the urge to stop hiding who I was, to stop apologizing for my place in this world. Yet I knew this discovery was not just a closure, it was a beginning. I wasn't naive enough to think this would erase all the scars, or mend the broken bonds overnight. But it gave me a new anchor, a sliver of power that belonged solely to me, power that no one could take away. I realized that the past, with all its pain and betrayal, was a foundation for something new, something fiercely mine. The days that followed, I made careful choices. I did not rush into rebuilding my life with reckless abandon. Instead, I let the revelation simmer deep beneath the surface, transforming my grief into fuel. I reached out to nobody at first, needing to gather my scattered pieces away from whispered judgments and pitying glances. One afternoon, while clearing the clutter in that same motel room, I found not just the diary but a second letter, this one from my ex-husband, dated just days before his death. His handwriting was shaky but resolute. He confessed truths long withheld, apologies that had never found my ears, and admissions of guilt and love tangled beyond repair. I read it over and over, the gravity of his words settling in like a tidal wave, painful yet liberating. The magnitude of these hidden truths was overwhelming, yet I felt lighter. This was the final piece, not because it excused or erased the wounds, but because it acknowledged the fractured parts of our shared history. I no longer needed to carry the silence. The secrets had spilled into the open, and with them, a way forward. Sometimes the truth does not confine, it frees, and as the sun filtered through the dusty blinds, casting long shadows across the faded carpet, I made a choice. I decided what to do with this newfound heritage. Not just the money or the legal papers, but the story that had shaped me. I would claim my right to live unshackled by silent burdens, unwrapped by unseen hands. That night I sat once more by the window, the diary resting on my lap like a talisman. The city lights flickered, distant and indifferent, as I whispered a vow into the sharp night air. This was my truth now. It wouldn't define me by pain anymore, but by the resilience born of knowing. The cage was opened, and I stepped towards the key I'd waited for all along. The woman I had become was ready to live on her own terms, finally free to build something lasting from the ashes of old secrets and quiet strength. The evening air pressed heavy against my skin as I stood in the dim room, the sharp scent of stale smoke and old wood mingling with the distant hum of the city outside. Across from me, he loomed like a specter of my past, the one who had soaked up years of my sacrifice without a flicker of gratitude. His eyes, once warm and inviting, were cold now, hardened by a lifetime of denial and resentment. I drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of every moment leading to this confrontation crush against my ribs like a vice tightening. This was it, the culmination of decades of silence, pain, and stolen dreams. I stepped forward, the scrape of my shoe on the warped floorboards loud in the haze-filled quiet. "You spent years taking from me," I began, my voice clear though my heart hammered like a drum in my chest. "Years expecting everything, without ever asking if I wanted to give. But I'm done. This ends now." He scoffed, a bitter edge in his laugh that made my skin crawl. "You think walking away changes anything? You're making a mistake. You're selfish, blind to the mess you leave." The words hit like cold stones, but I held firm. Selfish? No. For years I swallowed my own needs, drowned my desires just to keep your world from falling apart. I erased myself for the sake of your comfort. And now, I'm finally reclaiming the life they stole. He stepped closer, nostrils flaring. "You always thought you deserved more. It was never about me. You destroyed everything good. Your family, your duty. For what? Freedom? Foolishness." I raised my chin, the fire igniting inside me now, unmistakable. Duty isn't demanded, it's chosen. And I chose to save myself. You never understood that. The room seemed to shrink around us, every breath oppressive, every heartbeat loud in my ears. His eyes searched mine, wild and desperate, like a man drowning in waves he refuses to swim against. I could see the cracks in his facade, the powerless rage bubbling beneath the surface. "You think you're free," he spat, "but freedom is a lie. You'll come crawling back." "No," I said firmly. "I will never crawl back." A silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, before he slammed his fist into the table, the wood splitting beneath the impact. "You'll regret this. Mark my words." I felt a surge of pity more than fear. For years I had lived under his judgment, crushed by his expectations. But now, the chains were broken, and I stood taller than ever before. "I don't regret surviving," I replied softly. "I regret I didn't see the truth sooner." He lunged forward, his face flushed with fury. "You're nothing without me. Don't forget that." This time I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I'm everything without you." The words echoed like a declaration, solid and undeniable. As I turned toward the door, I felt the heat of his gaze burning through me, but I didn't look back. The air outside was cool, crisp, a sharp contrast to the stifling room I left behind. The night welcomed me like a long-lost friend, the stars above shimmering with quiet approval as I stepped into the unknown. For the first time in decades, I was free, not owed to anyone, not shackled by pain or guilt. I was whole. I was alive. I carried nothing but my truth, my strength, and my voice, clear and unyielding. And with each step I took into the dark, I shed the years of silence and sacrifice like a heavy coat, revealing the bright, fierce woman I always was beneath. The past was a shadow behind me now. The future was mine, uncharted, vast, and filled with light. I woke up this morning feeling lighter, like the weight I carried for so long had finally moved off my chest. Sunlight spilled through the window, painting warm streaks across the floor, something I hadn't noticed in years. The air in the room smelled fresh, a mix of jasmine from the garden and faint traces of the coffee brewing outside. I stretched and felt the quiet hum of hope in my bones. After years of living in the shadows of others, of bending and breaking myself to fit their needs, I was finally starting to carve out a space just for me. Not a physical space alone, even though I had cleaned and rearranged my small apartment, throwing away things that reminded me of pain, but a mental and emotional freedom, the kind that bubbles up like a hidden spring. I poured myself a cup of tea, not rushed like before, but slowly, appreciating the simple ritual like it was a small ceremony of rebirth. I dressed in clothes that made me feel strong, choosing colors that spoke of energy and calm, not the faded grays and browns I clung to. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, but was beginning to embrace. Lines of laughter and struggle etched on her face, eyes clear and steady, no longer clouded by self-doubt. I smiled at her reflection, a solemn nod of promise. This was the new me. Outside, the city was waking up with its usual clamor, but I felt strangely at peace amid the chaos. I met Anna at the cafe we found last week, a quiet corner spot with soft music and plants everywhere. She smiled warmly, the kind of smile that didn't carry a hidden agenda or a demand. We talked about small things, a book she was reading, a recipe she wanted to try. For the first time, my words didn't come from a place of trying to please, but from genuine connection. It was simple. It was real. That afternoon, I wrote a letter, not to anyone else, but to myself. I thanked the woman I had been for enduring so much, for loving fiercely even when it went unnoticed. I forgave myself for the moments I had believed I wasn't enough. I promised to listen to my own needs, to protect my peace like a sacred treasure. When I folded the letter and tucked it away, I felt a sense of completion, as if a long chapter was finally closing. Evenings now feel different. Instead of being a backdrop of tension and silence, my apartment hums softly with light and music. I light a candle, let its glow fill the room, and breathe deeply, feeling each breath expand the space inside me. There's no rush, no second guessing, just a steady rhythm of presence. Tomorrow is not a grand destination, but another day to live fully, to nurture myself and those who truly respect me. My past will always be a part of my story, but it no longer defines my horizon. The door to fear and doubt has quietly closed behind me. I stand at the threshold of something new, uncertain, yes, but alive. I am no longer the woman shaped by sacrifice and silence. I am the woman who stands her ground, who seeks joy without guilt, who knows her voice matters. I am enough, I whisper to the night, and it answers back with a gentle breeze, carrying me forward into the dawn.